lifetime immunity. You're going to have this for life. But actually what's happened is that they discovered, well, the immunizations didn't last so long. You have to get booster shots or booster sugar cubes or whatever it is. And then you reacquire your immunity and all of that. But a lot of the baby boomers did not do that, myself included. And yet, so you had a very small percentage of the population that's actually immunized, but you haven't ever had a mass breakout of flu epidemics or the like. So that disproves this whole thing that you have to have herd immunity in order to prevent mass pandemics. So, but they'll still use that against you. Now they're saying, oh, 95% of the population has to be vaccinated, or else we run the risk of not having enough herd immunity. But, like I said, you have far better protection naturally. Now, there's another fraud that's being propagated here, and that's the Gardasil for young girls. And they do this a lot in the States, and it's being pushed almost uniquely by the drug companies and the politicians who are in the pay of the drug companies who stand to make a lot of money from this. It's a supposed vaccine for young girls, and I say supposed because there's actually been no real connection made between the injection and the prevention of cervical cancer. This is a drug that's meant to prevent young girls from getting HPV, human papilloma virus, but only 3 of the 6 varieties of it, and keep them from getting it. But there's no actual proven connection between HPV and getting cervical cancer. Yet they want to make that connection so they can sell product giving these jabs to people. Actually, there have been a tremendous number of deaths associated with the jabs in the US. But it's great for drug company profits. So what do? Protect yourself. Don't be a lemming and jump off the cliff with everyone else just because everyone around you is saying, oh, let's get the shot, all of that. Don't do that. But do take natural preventatives. Again, I would urge you to have a healthy diet, number one. Take natural vitamin D. Costs almost nothing to take natural vitamin D. For me to take 2,000 units a day for a month costs me maybe €2. That's how cheap it is if you have access to low-cost vitamins, not the high-priced pharmaceutical ones, by the way. Selenium, eat a Brazil nut a day, and you get adequate levels of selenium. Ionic silver, if you can get your hands on it, there's a company in Wales that sells a very good brand that comes from the States. You also have olive leaf extract, curcumin, which is part of the spices, you know, like one of the spices used in Indian food, and has very strong anti-cancer properties, by the way. Truth number 3, don't believe what the government tells you. Almost guaranteed they're telling you a lie. And keep in mind that freedom actually works. And when I say freedom, I'm not talking about this elusive national freedom that the politicians want you to believe in. Oh, Irish is free, Ireland is free, the United States, land of the free, home of the brave, all this patriotic nonsense. I'm talking about real freedom, individual liberty, the right that you should have to do what you want with your life, just as long as you are not interfering with the equal right of someone else to do that. The opposite of this is totalitarianism. And liberty is not only morally superior to coercion, it's also practically superior. The downside is this, and this is why it's so often feared, is that if you're truly to be free, that means you have to take personal responsibility for your actions. A lot of people don't like that. They don't want to have to take personal responsibility. So they fear freedom. They want the government to tell them what to do. But let me give you an example of how it's practically superior. And this is an example that also applies to Ireland within the European Union. And you've seen it yourself with the Celtic tiger, reputation that Ireland acquired. The last time I was in Ireland was May 1980, and boy, was it a different country then. For me to come back 29 years later and see how much it's changed, it's been incredible. Well, why is that? Because you've enacted lower taxes and you've had a lot of incentives for companies to come in. It's not been because you've been a big country like Brazil or the United States or Russia with lots of natural resources. And that's why I want to compare Hong Kong to Brazil. I just thought about this before one speech I did, and I just scribbled it on a chalkboard, but here I did it up for us in a kind of a neater fashion. So here you have Hong Kong, which only has 1,100 square kilometers, compared to Brazil. And by the way, Brazil, I have to give you one caution. Since this was done, Brazil has started lowering its regulatory overload, and it's also been making it much easier for businesses to operate within Brazil. So it's actually gone more free market. And so here you have, so some of this has changed since then, but this was a good example in the late 90s. These figures are from like 1997, 1998. Brazil with 8.5 million square kilometers. Then you have a population of 6.9 million in Hong Kong, 96th rank in the world. 183 million, 5th ranked in the world for the population of Brazil. So you would expect the gross domestic product of Brazil to be higher, which it is, $1.7 trillion US, so it ranks 10th in the world, compared to Hong Kong, which is only 189.5 billion, 36th in the world. But you notice it's starting to narrow the distance. Population 5th versus 96, GDP 36th versus 10th. Then you go down to actual per capita, and you have 27 per person in Hong Kong, 27,466, making it rank 28th in the world. What do you have in Brazil with all its natural resources, all the stuff it can do? It's huge land available, huge population. You'd think it'd be higher. No, $5,717 per person, making it 64th in the world. Why is this? It's not because Hong Kong has a lot of natural resources. It's not because Hong Kong, was founded by all sorts of wonderful people. It's not. They're people just like anywhere else in the world. It's because they were left the legacy of, I hate to say it, I mean it applies to Ireland and the US as well in a way, but British colonial rule that they took to heart, that is rule of law, very low corruption, you had courts that enforced contracts, and you had a free market system. So the poorest refugee swimming across from a boat from communist China could then start working free in Hong Kong and work his or her rear end off until they made a success of their lives with very few hindrances to starting a new business. That was one of the beauties of Ireland. There were very few hindrances starting a new business, and one reason for the Celtic Tiger Revolution here. So you can see that freedom practically works. So you have a republic versus the empire, and you might read this at the top for Irish Republic versus the European Union. So what do you have? Rule of law. Now I'm not saying, none of this is perfect. I mean, you'll find corruption even at the lowest levels. You'll find bad politicians even at the lowest level. You will find the person trying to be the big fish in a little pond anywhere. You'll never have a perfect society or a perfect system. What you want to do is put the mechanisms in place to minimize the mistakes, to minimize the accumulation of power, to minimize the corruption. So in a republic, generally, where there are controls on people, you'll have the rule of law. What do you have in an empire? You tend to have rule of bureaucrats. You tend to have more protection of individuals in a republic. What do you have in an empire? You have mass uniformity. The republic will tend to have more prosperity because there are fewer rules, regulations, fewer hindrances to a person doing what he or she thinks best with their lives to make a living for himself or herself or her family. Empires are characterized by stagnation. You'll see this particularly, and I'll make a prediction, which is an easy one, and that is that the United States, which was so prosperous in its early years, is now increasingly more of obviously an empire, but stagnating under the burden of its imperial overload, with all the rules, regulations, stationing troops in 180 different countries and the like. And typically, republics are more peaceful, not always, but typically, and you'll tend to find empires enmeshed in wars. So I think, at least for me, the choice is clear what I would want. Would I want to be part of a big, swaggering empire that looks good and I can throw my weight around, or would I rather have the rule of law where my wishes are more likely to be respected and where there's prosperity and where there's peace? So what do you do about this? What can anyone do? It's just us. We're just individuals, and maybe it will tell us. Well, first of all, politicians, sort of a universal law,